Hello, everyone. Welcome. Super excited that you all joined us today. Can you all hear me okay? Just give me a yes. Okay. Thank you, Teresa. Thumbs up. Awesome. Yes, Allison, thank you. Hello, everyone. So we can just go ahead and get started. I think we have a pretty good amount of people here. And so I will start by introducing myself. I am Deandria Barber. I am the Family and Consumer Science for the University of Georgia Clayton County office. For those who are not familiar with Clayton County Extension or just Extension in general, we are in 159 counties across the state, which is all the counties in Georgia. And basically, we provide research-based information to you all, our public, our community. And we provide information in areas of family and consumer science, which is the area that I work in, as well as for 4-H, which is youth development. And then also we have A&R, which is agricultural and natural resources. So we are here for you all just to provide information and knowledge and assist you guys in whatever you have going on at home in life. We're just here for you. So I, again, am super excited that you all have joined me today. We are going to talk about mold and moisture control, basically molding our homes to prevent mold growth. So let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, so there is a chat box. So I will be asking questions throughout the presentation. I will also be doing polls as well. If you have a question or just have a comment, feel free to unmute yourself by clicking the little red microphone that's by your name on your screen. And I'm really hoping that this conversation is a conversation and not just a presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to cover a couple of things. We're first going to cover understanding moisture and mold. And then we're going to talk a little bit about preventing mold growth. And then part 3, we're going to deal with mold in our homes. And then part 4, we are going to wrap up. And hopefully some of the stuff we talked about will stick and we can go home and start preventing that mold growth. So I would just like to ask, start off by asking you guys, what have you heard about mold? Feel free to unmute yourselves, or you could just put it in the chat box. Like, what are some things that you've heard about mold? Are you super familiar with mold? Like, is this a thing you struggle with all the time? Feel free to unmute.
Black mold is dangerous.
Yes, Stacy.
Mold is dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I see a chat. Let me pull my chat box back up. It can make you sick. Yes, Teresa, that is a great point. Any other things that we've heard about mold? It's harmful to our health, caused by moisture buildup, not easy to get rid of. Allison, I have had issues since the hurricane. Black mold is deadly. Yes, these are all great points. So then my next question for you all, allergies, Stacy. Yep, that's a good point as well, Stacy. My next question for you all is, what have you heard are good or bad ways to deal with mold? What are some good ways that you've heard about to deal with mold, and what are some bad ways that you've heard about to deal with mold? So what is a good way you've heard to kind of get rid of the mold that you found below your bathroom sink? What is a bad way? Good ways: fix leaky pipes, keep things dry, use bleach solution to remove mold. Awesome. Stacy, bleach, grapefruit seed extract. That's interesting. Stacy, do you mind expounding about the grapefruit seed extract? Are you just supposed to put like the grapefruit seed on the cloth and kind of just wipe it up?
I never used it personally, but
Okay.
I have a friend that had it in their air conditioning ducts, and this was in Oklahoma, and they hired a contractor that came out and cleaned out the air ducts, and they used some kind of a grapefruit seed extract, and I've wanted to use it ever since I heard about it, because a lot of times people are on septics and they really shouldn't use bleach solutions. But anyway, yeah.
Wow, that's so
Something to
interesting.
look up.
Yeah, for sure. I have not heard that, so I'm definitely going to have to bring that up with our specialist to see if that is like a real thing, because I have not heard that before. And you mentioned Oklahoma, so I'm actually.
Well, it's mold, and I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Stacey. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. As far as I know, it's mold and funguses in general, because they're kind of in the same class. And also there's other like leaves, like olive leaf extract that may be another mitigating thing. And also coconut, there's something with coconut that mitigates things, but I don't know if it actually would clean off mold off of your wall.
Okay. No,
I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing that. I'm literally writing all that stuff down so I could connect with our mold specialist to see if she's heard anything about that. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Stacey. So we've all heard good ways to get rid of it. We've all heard bad ways to get rid of it. And we've all heard like, not horror stories. I don't want to say horror stories, but we've all heard different stories about mold. And so hopefully throughout this presentation or this conversation, we can actually come back to this list that we've talked about at the beginning and determine whether or not any of these things that we've listed or said are fact, fiction, or both. So keep this list in your head of ways to get rid of mold, good and bad, and what we've actually heard about mold. And let's see if we could actually determine whether or not some of those things that we've heard are fact, fiction, or both, and some of the ways to mitigate or remediate mold are fact, fiction, or both. Oh, Teresa gave us another suggestion, vinegar and baking soda. Awesome. Thank you, Teresa, for sharing. So let's keep going. Ooh, look at that mold. Understanding moisture and mold. So as Stacey kind of alluded to, mold is basically a fungi. Molds are actually an essential part of the ecosystem. They're basically like nature's recycler, so they are literally everywhere. There are hundreds of species, many different types of mold. Some tend to be outdoors and some thrive indoors. Usually mold is actually in the air and on many different types of surfaces. And so as you can see here, it releases tiny spores which travel in the air and settle on various surfaces. So these are some examples of what mold may look like. And then if in the right conditions, this mold is going to multiply and look eventually like this, which is something we don't want to do and will definitely impact our health in every type of a way. So the two main conditions that mold is usually like amplifies or grows is moisture and organic matter, which is basically exactly what our house is made up of. Our houses are made up of wood, paper, carpet, insulation, drywall, etc., etc., etc. And so with the moisture and the organic matter, mold is really, really going to thrive. And it may eventually turn out like this picture here, which is actually a real picture of mold on a ceiling. So if you ever see an environment that looks like that, you want to run the other way. Just say. So mold is a fuzzy science. There's no clear dose response threshold like with many chemicals, and not everyone reacts to mold in the same way. Health effects vary widely and depend on a combination of factors, including the amount of exposure. So that previous picture that I just showed, if you are living in an environment like that, that's a lot of exposure to mold. So it's probably going to have a very intense impact on your health. And then you also think about the sensitivity of individuals, like those who have asthma, allergies, and respiratory problems. I know my mother has asthma, allergies, and she also has sarcoidosis, which is a respiratory problem. And so I know for sure she can identify just by stepping in my house if there was mold. She would be able to identify it just that quickly because of her sensitivity to those allergies and to mold in general. A lot of people with weakened immunities are going to be a lot more sensitive to mold exposure than those who had full-grown immune systems. Children also are going to have a sensitivity to mold exposure, as well as older adults. And then it also kind of depends on the type of mold as well. So Stacy actually mentioned, well, I will hold the conversation about black mold until a little bit later. So some other health effects from mold: allergic reactions, which are actually pretty common. Most mold spores are allergenic. And we mentioned asthma already. Asthma can be triggered by the spores of the mold. There's allergic rhinitis, which has symptoms of like hay fever, which is fever, of course, fever, right? Fever, coughing, sneezing, red eyes, and a sore throat. Then there's HP, which is hypersensitivity pneumonitis, which typically happens when you're constantly being exposed to that heavy mold, kind of like that picture we just saw with the mold on the ceiling. And so also another health effect is infectious disease, which is actually pretty rare, but it does happen. It's in immunosuppressed persons, and it can actually be transferred through bat and bird droppings. So if that bat or that bird comes into contact with mold and something happens, I don't know if you're having a picnic and you just come into contact with that, there's a chance that, you know, a rare infectious disease could take place from mold. And then there's more, of course, there's more, right? I think one of the big things, or one of the most common things that we saw you all listed, was that it really impacts your health. And you can really see that from these past few slides. But then there's also the toxic effects, certain types of mold, which certain types of mold can cause fatigue or flu-like symptoms. You have the nausea, the vomiting, the diarrhea, the respiratory, eye, skin irritation. There's also neurologic effects, memory loss, headaches, cognitive, mood disorders. Then there's the suppression of immune system, and then organic dust toxic syndrome. So these health effects that I just mentioned have been associated with mold exposures, but I would like to say that there is not a strong connection, scientific relationship, I should say, to meet the standards for cause and effect. So, but these symptoms have been associated with mold. So Stacy brought up black mold a little bit earlier. So let's talk about toxic mold. I mentioned that there's so many different types of mold out there. And so one thing that we have to remember is that toxic mold is a misnomer. There's actually no such thing as toxic mold. Rather, there are some types of mold that can produce toxins in certain conditions. So it's not necessarily toxic mold, but they're producing those toxins that could really impact our health. So basically, you're identifying a toxogen when you're thinking about mold that produces toxins. Black mold, are this word that I honestly can't say no matter how hard I practice it. Stachybotrys chartarum, that works, or SC, has been made very, very, very popular in the past, I think, couple of years. And it's unfortunately often inappropriately labeled black mold. So just because the mold in your house looks black does not mean you have a toxigenic mold. Doesn't mean it's black mold. So I think we've come to the conclusion that black mold is the most toxic mold. But just because it's black, it doesn't necessarily mean it's toxic. So Stachy, or SC, let's just say SC, can produce a toxin that is suspected of contributing to serious health effects. But again, the evidence has not been conclusive. On the corner of this slide, you can actually see like a picture of it. You can tell it's like a slimy looking mold that grows only on cellulose, like wood or paper that has been very wet for an extended period of time, such as in a flood situation. So typically this type of mold comes when, say your basement flooded and the water is kind of just sitting there for a little bit. I know we've had a lot of rain in the past couple months or weeks. This mold can occur because it's kind of been sitting there for an extended period of time. Any questions regarding this? Did I make everybody sad by, yes, Stacey, go ahead.
I have a question on the, so the Stachybotrys chartarum, it only grows on wood then? Oh, so that's good to know. That's why a lot of basements are made out of cement.
Yeah, okay. So wood or paper is the most common, I think, place that it actually grows, like the cellulose places, so wood or paper. Yep, and if it stays super wet for a very long time, that is probably not good. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yes, thanks. No problem. And so associated with this mold, infant lung bleeding, immune suppression, toxic effects previously stated. And then one other thing to remember about this mold is that the spores are released upon drying. And so if it's drying, there's more spores that are going to be released, which of course can increase your exposure to that mold. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about what the difference is between mold and mildew. So I think I know my mom is very guilty of this. She calls everything mildew, something like that. But mildew refers to certain kinds of mold or fungus. The term mildew is often used generically to refer to mold growth, usually with a flat growth habit. People tend to use the word mildew for growth on shower curtains and clothing, implying that it's harmless. It can also be found on window sills and other places where moisture levels are high. No matter what, regardless of type or what it's on, mold should be removed promptly, remedied promptly. So even if it's mildew, which is very common, my mom says that a lot, it's still a type of mold, and it's important to kind of remediate that or remedy it as quickly as possible. Were you all familiar with mildew, the difference between mildew and mold? You can say it through the chat or unmute yourself. No, okay.
No.
Okay, gotcha, Allison. Yeah. Brandon thought they were different, actually. Okay. I think it's very confusing. I'm going to have to give this presentation to my mom as well, so she can start using the right word. So let's talk a little bit about preventing mold growth, which is, I'm assuming, why everyone is kind of here. We've had some type of experience of mold, and we don't want it to ever happen again. So let's look at some ways that we can actually prevent mold growth. So mold growth indicates excess moisture. So we've already hit on that. It needs two main things to actually grow and thrive. Can anybody tell me what those two main things are? I already said one.
Well, water.
Yes, moisture, yes.
And I guess the spores.
Yeah. So moisture and organic matter. Thanks, Brandon. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yes.
So, yep.
Thank you.
You're getting there, Stacy. I felt it. I saw your brain moving. So mold growth indicates excess moisture. So you must find the source and eliminate it. I think that is, if you don't get anything from this presentation, I think that is one thing we want to stress to you all, that you have to eliminate the moisture in order to really remedy that mold situation that you have. So we have indoor humidity. The key to mold, we said, is moisture control. And that is really the only thing that we can control, is the moisture in our homes, not necessarily where we work, right? If you don't own your business, but mainly the moisture in our homes. And so ways to do that is to look at your indoor humidity. So we want to have less than 70% of relative humidity. Aim for less than 60%. We want to make sure that we're maintaining the exterior, we're maintaining the interior also to prevent leaks, and we want to make sure that we're rapidly drying after water intrusion. So if you happen to have a leak that you notice is happening on your kitchen sink, a great way to make sure that mold doesn't thrive and exist there is to dry it as soon as possible. Dry it within 2 to 3 days after that water intrusion. It's important to also remember that moisture, if you have wood, I know I have wood under my sink, and so should be less than 18% in order for mold to not grow. The moisture in the wood should be less than 18%. So let's talk a little bit about humidity a little bit more. So I know on the last slide we said we wanted less than 70% relative humidity. We really want to aim for 40 to 60%. There's so many ways, there's so many like little tools that you can actually use and purchase that can help to measure the humidity in your home. I know I have a 3-year-old, and so when she was younger, she had a lot of like allergies and coughing situations. We were trying to figure out what was going on, and so we ordered a humidity measurer that measured and tracks the humidity within the room, within the house actually, and it will actually alert us if the humidity reaches a certain level. So we can either turn on the air or something of that nature. So with relative humidity, it's important to remember that it can actually impact not only mold, but dust mites, bacteria, and asthma. So the optimal zone, your goal is to try to maintain indoor relative humidity between 40 and 60%. So this this graph right here, this chart, shows you the humidity, or how much humidity it will take in order for different bacteria, viruses, or fungi to grow. Even dust mites. Dust mites are attracted to humidity. So if you have allergies, it's really important to pay attention to humidity for multiple reasons, especially for these dust mite reasons. So relative humidity tells how much water vapor is in the air compared to how much it could hold at that temperature. It is typically shown as a percent. So here we have, for example, relative humidity of 50% means the air is holding 1/2 of the water vapor it can hold. And so as you're going, I don't know if you're building a house or if you're moving, or these are things you definitely want to think about when you're moving or building or adding on to your house. Is you want to make sure that you're creating a space where the relative humidity is conducive to your environment. It's a nice little crawly picture of a dust mite for you, just in case you need it to be grossed out today. But for mold control, you want to make sure that your relative humidity is less than 70%. For dust mite control, you want to make sure that your relative humidity is less than 50%. Yes, you. Very gross, Rebecca. Sorry. So some more mold pictures. So this is actually a picture of mold growing on a ceiling that is chilled by wind blowing through the sulfite across uninsulated gypsum board. So there's actually two pictures here, as you can see. So the first one is that mold due to poor insulation or wind blowing through the insulation. So it's the warm and the cold that is leading and causing the mold to kind of grow, which is basically causing condensation. And that is what that beautiful mold picture at the top represents. And then you also have mold around window where there's no insulation. So I go back to my statement a couple of, not even a couple of slides ago. Last slide, I was saying when you're moving or you're purchasing or you're doing upgrades, make sure that you have proper insulation to help it not, to help decrease condensation in your home, which we'll actually talk about in our next slide. Because condensation is the cause for most of the mold that is around the windows and the seals that we see here. So condensation, mold can actually grow out of sight. So on that last slide, we actually looked at mold growing in sight, typically around the window seals when the warmer air comes into contact with cold surfaces, which is typically what happens with window seals and those things that are closer to the window. But this is a picture of condensation of a hidden site. So I know a lot of us don't think that mold can happen on the bottom of a toilet tank, but it actually can. Condensation, as I mentioned, occurs when there's too much humidity and the surfaces are too cool. So this tank here is cooled by incoming water. The water vapor from the outdoor air during warm, humid times of the year and from showers is coming into contact with this tank that is producing that cool surface, and which is causing condensation to take place. So basically the mold is getting a nutrient, not from the porcelain, but from the paper dust released by tearing toilet tissue. So with the condensation and the toilet tissue dust coming together, so we have the moisture and we have the organic matter coming together, we have our friend here, mold. So this problem can actually be avoided by using an insulated toilet, or air conditioning, or dehumidifying the house air, or using a mixing valve to supply warm water to the toilet tank. Any questions regarding this beautiful mold on the bottom of a toilet tank? No. Stacey's like, no. Awesome. So humidity plays a huge role in mold growth. There are many ways to reduce indoor humidity using exhaust fans. So increase your ventilation by using the exhaust fans in the bathroom, the kitchen, and the laundry room. And make sure that your exhaust fans are, I guess, exhausting outdoors and not under the house or in a separate room, to ensure that, you know, you don't have a reoccurring problem. One way to actually see if your exhaust fans are working is to do the toilet paper test. So you could just tear off a piece of toilet paper, turn on your exhaust fan, hold it about an inch away from the exhaust fan, get a step stool, make sure you're safe, please. Hold it about an inch away from the exhaust fan. And it should, if it's acting properly, if it has the power that it should have, it should automatically pull the tissue paper from your hands and it should hold it in place. The exhaust fan should hold the tissue paper in place. Now, if your exhaust fan does not do that, then you may need to look into your exhaust fan. There's different ways you could, well, I don't want to say there's different ways. I personally don't know the ways that you can do that. But you definitely, if you do not pass the toilet paper test, you definitely want to get your exhaust fans checked out, because that is showing you that it's not getting rid of the humidity at a strong, I guess, at a strong pace, in a strong manner, to prevent, I guess, your house from being over humid. Another important step in avoiding our indoor humidity control is proper size air conditioner. So it's important to remember that bigger is not better. Why? Because it reaches the set temperature before it has chances to condense much moisture from the air. So it's important to know that, like, your air conditioner is not just there to kind of cool you off. I know that's super important, especially if you're here in Georgia and it's 100 million degrees outside. But it's also there to remove moisture from the air. And so sometimes when you buy those oversized air conditioners, they are not equipped, so they reach the set temperature a lot quicker than a regular sized air conditioner. And so if they're reaching that temperature a lot quicker, they are not removing the moisture, all the humidity from the air. Does that make sense to everyone? All I can see is Stacey, so I'm just gonna go by Stacey. Yeah, does that make sense, Stacey? Yeah. And so another way that we can kind of get indoor humidity control is by sealing air leaks around windows and doors. And so a couple of slides ago, we showed you pictures of mold around the seals and typically around the window seals and close to the door. And so you definitely want to make sure that you have those sealed a little bit better by caulking or adding weather stripping to make sure that that cool air or that hot air doesn't come in and hit the surfaces that will create condensation, which then creates the mold growth. And another way is, if you do have like basements and crawl spaces, try to increase the ventilation there. Create vents in a crawl space. Create vents on the roof to release warm air. There's different ways that you can get that space ventilated as well. So another way to actually help prevent some mold growth is actually by buying some tools. So I mentioned that I purchased a humidity meter, which is also called a hygrometer, for my little girl when she was a little bit younger and she was really having bad allergies, to really detect the humidity level in your house. There's also these moisture meters right here. You guys can see my mouse. These moisture meters are more helpful for measuring the moisture content in a variety of building materials following water damage. So you can use either a probe, or you can actually connect it directly to the surface of the material to see, you know, if what the moisture level is in that specific wall. I know this is pretty common with like if you're cleaning your carpet or if the insurance comes out. One year my mom had one of our bathrooms flood into my room, and so in order to prevent mold, of course the insurance, they pulled up the carpet and they used the moisture meters to kind of check where that moisture was, and to dry as soon as possible. The guy was there probably within 48 hours to make sure that there was no mold growth happening. And then one of the other tools that you could use is a humidistat, this little fun looking yellow tool right here. This is a control device that can be connected to the HVAC system and adjusted so that if the humidity level rises above a set point, the HVAC system will automatically come on. So does anybody have any tools to help them monitor the humidity in their home already?
I do, but it's because of pianos and musical instruments.
Awesome. Do you have one of these tools that were just mentioned, or is it a different kind of tool?
Well, I think it's a hydrometer. It measures the humidity in the piano so that you can water. They have all these humidifier things for pianos where you water your piano. We lived in Alaska actually when we had it, and it would get really, really, really dry in the winter. Right. And you had to really keep up on it. Yeah.
Awesome. So now you can use it for another reason, to make sure that your pianos and beautiful, your beautiful home does not get mold. That's awesome. So another tool, of course, is this dehumidifier. They are actually very useful for managing humidity levels in buildings. High humidity in buildings is either the result of a warm, humid outdoor air entering the building, or a strong source of indoor humidity. So in the previous slide, we actually looked at the source of humidity was water migrating through the foundation, evaporating into the basement during cold weather. In warm weather, it was both the damp foundation and outdoor air. So one dehumidifier running at least 35% of each hour, when running at least 35% of each hour, air conditioners dehumidify. So how many of you guys actually have your air on, auto on or fan on, or do you guys have a preference? So I guess my question is your air running at least 35% of each hour?
Mine probably is, but I just moved from a cold climate.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Well, welcome to the hot climate. So dehumidifiers can be very useful in combination with air conditioners in hot, humid climates like Georgia with extended part load conditions. So it's really important to remember that dehumidifiers do not cool the air. So if you're trying to get cool air and to dehumidify, you definitely want to make sure that your air conditioner is up and going. So some things, if you're interested actually in getting a dehumidifier, some things to look for is that it's low energy use. Some models are actually Energy Star rated. You also want to make sure that it's quiet operation. Many dehumidifiers are too noisy to use in occupied space. And also a direct drain or condensate pump. Otherwise, a tank that can capture the water that must be emptied several times a day. And then we also want to make sure that it's freeze protected. So they can be used in cool spaces like basements or crawl spaces. So let's look at some fun stuff. So what are the two things that cause mold to thrive? Like, what are the two things that cause mold to thrive? Moisture.
And organic matter.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Stacey. So one way to make sure that you're preventing mold growth is really, I guess, looking at or analyzing the methods of water entry. So here is like a little house that kind of shows you areas in which water can enter your home. And so, of course, we have the leaks with the storm coming through, the surface water coming down through the basement by the cat that looks like a cat. We also have the groundwater, which is below the house that can enter as well. We have air from soil, which is the water vapor. And then, of course, we have the cooking, the bathing, watering plants, washing, breathing in general. So we all know that water eventually is going to enter. Like, we can't avoid water entering our house, but it's just really important to remember that when it does happen, it's really important to find the source quickly, stop entry, and dry within 48 hours. So this is preventing water entry. So some ways to actually do that are to direct water away from the foundation of your house. Extend the downspouts. So you want to make sure that the downspouts are 2% grade, which is reflective of the slope of the downspout, and then extends out to at least 10 feet so that it has plenty of room to find somewhere else to release its moisture and not near your house. You also want to make sure that you are cleaning and repairing your gutters so that the same thing, it flows away from your house and not necessarily towards your house or towards any entry in close to your house. And then one other thing you want to be sure to do is actually manage water vapor, which is kind of hard to manage, to be honest with you. But water vapor actually flows from a warmer side to a cooler side, so that water vapor really takes place, or the water vapor migration typically takes place around the entrances of your house or the outside of your house, exterior, when the exterior and the interior of your house meet. So having really great insulation or moisture control insulation, I think really helps with water vapor migration, and just making sure that your inside temperature environment is not reflective of the outside temperature environment, but doesn't create a a situation in which condensation takes place and humidity takes place. So here is a house, poor construction. So a lot of times poor construction actually leads to mold growth. As you can see here at the bottom picture, seems like a nice, normal, little quiet room. This is what it looked like when it was finished. There's no sign of mold, but it smelled very musty. And so if you look at this bigger picture, you will see that it was actually built, the room was built with walls that are partially below grade. And when we say below grade, that means underground, which is not good when it comes to water getting into your house. And so typically, unless you have a slope, a downspout that slopes away from your house, capturing that water, you can see here that the ground slopes towards the house. And so the water was leaking into that cute little quaint area and was creating this mold that we see here and that musty smell. So removing this furnishing and finishes revealed significant mold growth. So here's another picture of leaks that typically happen with windows and plumbing. I think plumbing leaks occur. I think plumbing leaks are when most of mold growth really occurs. Wet rooms such as kitchens, baths, and laundry rooms are the places that most likely have the plumbing leaks. So you want to make sure that you're always inspecting around toilets, tubs, showers, beneath sinks, clothes washers, or and dishwashers. It's always a great idea to have the drain basket and drain trap, which most of our homes and our sinks are standard with that. But a great way to actually test if your drain traps and your drain baskets are actually working properly, you could actually put a stopper in the sink. So this, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse. This would be an example of a drain basket. So you can actually put a stopper in the sink and run water to see if the basket leaks. And then to see if the trap leaks, you will actually let the water out and see if anything, spills out of the trap. Ways to repair that, it's actually simple repair by tightening and sealing as needed. Another thing that you guys could do is purchase a drain pan. Drain pans are an inexpensive way, which is right under the water heater right here, are an inexpensive way to reduce the impact of mechanical leaks. They can be used for hot water tanks and for washing machines. They are not intended to hold the capacity of the appliance, so they can't hold all the water that could possibly fill that water tank, right? So in this instance, actually, if you look close, you can see that the drain pan actually has a leak where the circle is because it's met the capacity for how much it could hold, and it actually should be replaced. Any questions so far? Teresa, Allison, are y'all still there? I have one.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Are there any kind of building materials that are the best kind to, like, why do we put wood under windows and plumbing if they're eventually going to leak and cause molds?
That is a really great question, and I wish I had the answers to that question. I don't know why we do that. I can definitely reach out to our specialists to see if there's any preferred materials that we should be using or should be looking for when we move or purchase or build on. But yeah, that's a really great question. It's interesting that, you know, our houses are being built the same way with no adjustments when we know these things are happening. Yeah, good question, Stacey.
Okay. Thanks.
So just to kind of shake things up a little bit, I'm going to start a poll for you guys because I want to see if you guys have been paying attention. So I'm going to launch this poll and you can answer using your mouse or keyboard. And I will give you guys about 30 minutes, not 30 minutes. It's a long time, 30 seconds to respond. Okay, only half responded, but that's okay. So yes. Ding, ding, ding. If you don't get any type of takeaway from this, this presentation today, be sure that you remember that moisture, the key to mold control is moisture control. Awesome. So one last question for you guys. Relative humidity should be between 20%. So I'm going to end poll right now. And so the correct answer is 40 to 60%. We want to make sure that we're kind of in that range. It will help us to prevent bacteria growth, dust mites, fungus, all of the above. Awesome. Thank you guys for participating. So now we're going to talk about dealing with mold in homes. So we all have kind of gathered, and I'm not going to ask you all again. We know that the key to mold control is moisture control. So how do we deal with an existing mold problem? So mold can actually be found in many different places in your home. You can often smell it before you see it. So if your home has this musty smell, look for mold. If your home has a mildew smell, look for mold. So there are many different areas you can look for mold: behind wallpaper, especially vinyl, drywall paneling, under carpeting and rugs, on or behind furniture, on or inside walls, inside ductwork, and roofing materials above ceiling tiles. As we talked about before, it often grows in the bathroom, kitchen, laundry room, basement, or crawl space. So typically in those wet spaces. So should you test for mold? How many of you guys believe you should test for mold? Yes, no, without looking at the the screen. So testing is actually not recommended. Yeah, Allison said yeah. Well, Brandon said no. I think Brandon cheated and looked at the screen. But testing is actually not recommended for mold unless it's ordered for medically diagnosis or by a professional mold remediation contractor as evidence of cleanup effectiveness. Mold testing is normally not useful or needed. There's many reasons for this. Testing can be costly and unnecessary in most instances. Test results do not tell you where the moisture is coming from, which we know moisture is what produces the mold. And so there are also some home testing kits that are available, but are not very reliable. If you decide to test the mold, you want to make sure that you're contacting a reliable lab. There are no required certifications or licenses for mold testing or removal. So you want to make sure that you're shopping carefully. And just to say that routine testing for mold is not even recommended by the Centers for Disease Control or the EPA, which is Environmental Protection Agency. All molds should be treated the same, using caution when cleaning up. So mold cleanup, who should clean the area? So it kind of depends on how large your moldy area is. So if it is less than about 10 square feet, the job can probably be handled by yourself. If it is larger than 10 square feet, you may want to consider professional assistance. If the HVAC system is contaminated, you want to consult the EPA guide, which is, I can also send to you guys so you'll have that easily accessed should you have the air ducts in your home clean. If mold is actually present in your HVAC system, do not run the HVAC system until the problem has been remedied. It could spread mold throughout the building or throughout your home. Some tips for deciding whether or not you want to have your air ducts cleaned are if there's substantial visible mold growth inside or on parts of your heating and cooling system. Ducts are infested with insects and or rodents. Ducts are clogged with so much dust, debris, and or particulate matter that it makes its way into the home. So those are some tips if you're thinking about having your air ducts cleaned. So I know a lot of people are really surprised when you tell them you don't have to get your home tested for mold. So with that statement, I would like to get anybody's opinion. Do you think you should still get your home tested for mold?
I think it would depend on how strong the smell is and if you see visible signs.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Even if it's if it's a whole entire basement, I don't think. Brandon says no because it doesn't really matter what type of mold it is, because either way, it doesn't belong in your home. That's a great point. That is a very great point.
That is a good point.
So yeah, you have a great point, Brandon. If you're beginning to smell that musty or that mildewy smell, first trying to find where that smell is coming from, trying to find where that moisture is coming from. I think, like we said a little bit earlier, typically when you're getting mold tested for mold, they cannot tell you where that moisture is coming from. And so that's really how you can prevent that mold growth or stop it from taking place, is really trying to figure out where that moisture is coming from. And so, great point, Brandon. The mold just doesn't belong. So it doesn't matter what type it is. Just trying to get rid of it is, I guess, the best process here. So if you guys choose to actually do the mold cleanup yourself, of course, it's very important that you protect yourself. I think we're all kind of have like a PPE closet right now with everything that's been going on. So you want to make sure that you have minimum protection by getting an N95 respirator, rubber gloves, boots, closed goggles, if you choose to actually remove the mold yourself. For bigger jobs, like your handling a whole entire basement or crawl space or something, you definitely want to make sure that you look like this guy over here on the right. Fully protected, no skin seen, you have a mask on and everything. So another thing to remember if you all are removing mold yourself is with homes that are predated 1978, those homes, the paint in those homes typically contain lead. So you want to make sure that you're taking proper precautions if you're cleaning up a wall that could have lead paint attached to it. Exposure to lead paint dust or demolition residue can be harmful to anyone, especially young children, and it can actually cause permanent damage. So if that is a concern, I would suggest getting your space tested for lead, not necessarily for mold, but for lead. That way you are, being safe and protecting yourself and your family. So, mold cleanup steps. So we talked about there's no need to test, so we can skip that mold. I guess the testing is if you smell mold or mildew or must, that is a sign of potential mold growth. So you want to isolate and ventilate. So you want to find that space where there has been mold growth. You want to seal off that moldy area, make sure that nobody has contact with it, and turn off the air. The reason for turning off the air is to prevent any, because we talked about what mold spores travel through air. So we don't want to prevent any more traveling of those mold spores. So then our second step would be to encapsulate, which is to cover with plastic. We want to make sure that we're covering everything with plastic that could possibly come into contact with that moldy space. So covering the floor and furniture and bagging removed materials for sealed disposal. So then step 3, remove and discard. I just mentioned we're going to bag and seal and dispose of moldy items. So if you have, I'm in my office right now, if I notice a mold sealing tile on my ceiling, I'm not going to keep that. I'm going to bag it, seal it, and dispose of it. And so there may be some things that you may not be able to just clean the mold off. You may have to bag, seal, and dispose. So then the fourth step is to clean. You want to make sure that we're using a non-phosphate detergent. So it's important to use non-phosphate because phosphates left behind provide mold food. And then you'll just have the same problem reoccurring. You want to clean before you sanitize. So it's important to know that there is definitely a difference between cleaning and sanitizing. You definitely want to sanitize if sewer or flood water has hit that space. And then we want to speed dry. We want to make sure that we're getting things dry within 48 hours of cleaning and disinfecting. So here are some disinfectants. Well, these are not disinfectants. These are some things you should be careful of when using disinfectants. A lot of disinfectants, as we know, are very hazardous. So things like bleach do kill mold, but unfortunately, it is not recommended as a routine practice during mold cleanup. There may be instances in where your best judgment will determine whether or not you need to use chlorine bleach or something of that nature. But for regular mold cleanup, it is not recommended. But if you do decide to use bleach, you definitely want to make sure that you are following the directions. You're doing 1.5 to 1 cup bleach per gallon water. You do not want to use bleach on metals. And you also want to be sure that you're not using bleach and mixing it with other solutions or detergents that contain ammonia or acid, because that will create toxic fumes. But just some more information about bleach. It is very harmful. So I know someone suggested actually using bleach when cleaning up mold. So it is harmful. It's very hazardous. Like I said, it should never be used on metals, or fine woods, or non-color flash materials. So it also has the ability to kill mold, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to remove mold. So there's also a huge difference. There's a great chance that you're killing mold, so you have the dead mold spores there and remnants, but they can actually carry toxins and can have the same health effects as live mold. So just keep that in mind if you all do choose to use bleach when cleaning up mold. So another suggestion is, of course, we talked about, is hiring a professional. So Georgia actually has no licensing or training requirements for mold remediation, so you want to make sure that you're shopping safely. So here are some options to help you identify a certified professional. And you also want to make sure that they are following the EPA's protocol or standards for mold removal. Any questions regarding or comments regarding using bleach or hiring a certified mold professional?
I have a question. Yes. Is bleach the only thing that kills it? I mean, Teresa suggested, I believe it was Teresa, suggested vinegar and baking soda, which I actually clean with a lot, but I didn't know maybe vinegar would kill it. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so there's actually a difference between removing it and killing it. So when we're thinking about preventing mold growth or getting rid of mold growth, we just kind of want to remove it. And so honestly, I know this is going to sound crazy. So our specialists actually just kind of suggest, like, you can remove mold growth just simply by some soap and water. So it's really more important to remove it rather than killing it, because those dead mold growth spores still have the same impact as live spores. So if vinegar and baking soda is helping to remove it, I think that's a natural way to remove. Those are natural ways to remove anything. Like, those are like key green cleaning tips. So I think that will actually work. And even your grapefruit seed extract. I think just with the bleach, it kind of just depends on the depth of, the mold growth. Like, if you have a whole wall that's full of mold growth, then maybe it may be time to kind of bleach that, or use bleach by mixing it with the water, of course, please. No ammonia, just water, and follow the directions, instructions. But I think more of the natural ways of removing removing mold are great. It also depends on sanitizing too. So, so you can sanitize by using, I think EPA, we've been doing a lot of sanitizing now with COVID. So you can use those same methods to sanitize with EPA, whether it's using like a Clorox wipe or a Lysol wipe or things like that. So cleaning and sanitizing it's important to kind of remember the difference in those two. And then with mold growth, there's a difference between removing and killing. We definitely want to remove the mold growth. If we just kill the mold growth, it doesn't mean we're free of those toxins that are being exposed. Does that make sense, Stacey? So we always want to kind of remain on low indoor humidity, 40 to 60%. We want to make sure that we're inspecting often. Musty odor typically means we have an active colony. And then if regrowth, we definitely want to act quickly. Repeat steps are hire a professional. Then just a couple of key points, some takeaways. Everybody should know this. We should just make this the model. The key to mold control is moisture control. So we know that is where we need to start. If we're smelling something that's musty or mildew, try to find that space that is preventing providing that moisture, so we can isolate it and figure out our next steps, whether or not we want to clean it up, if it's a small square footage to where we could actually clean it up, or if we need to hire a professional. Excess moisture in the home can be prevented. We just have to make sure that we're doing proper maintenance. We repair leaks, and we have constant ventilation. So thank you all so much for joining me for this Molding Your Home to Prevent Mold Growth webinar or presentation conversation. Here's some resources that I will actually send to you all in a follow-up email along with an evaluation link. So you guys can tell us how you enjoyed this program, if you found it helpful or not. Please let me know if you guys have any questions. I can stay on for a little bit longer, and feel free to ask any questions that you all have. Thank you, Stacey, for being here and for participating, and for welcome to, I guess, this warm climate. So